Hello, everyone. Welcome to the stream. I'm happy today to have Juraci joining us and appreciate you all joining today. It's bright and early for me in the US, not so much for those in Europe. Juraci's someone that I work with pretty extensively in the community. He spends a lot of time on Jaeger and OpenTelemetry. He's one of the main contributors and thought leaders driving the community forward. He also has a day job as an engineer at Red Hat and spends a lot of time on other CNCF projects and initiatives. So Juraci, welcome. If I missed anything else in your introduction, please feel free to chime in, but I'm going to ask you a little bit about your background. I also wanted to say Jonah Kowall, most of you know who I am, CTO at Logs.io, and also work on a lot of these projects, and that's why I've asked Juraci to join us. So welcome, good to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. Yeah, and your description was really accurate. I mean, I do work, on Jaeger and OpenTelemetry, and the good thing about that is that I'm paid to do that. So, my day job, is indeed around those projects. So, yeah.
And I see your red hat that's strategically placed over your head. So,
so in several places, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really a great company how you can build such a successful business on open source. It's really the model, and how they can bring engineers to work almost entirely full-time on these projects. It's really amazing for all of us. It's amazing for the community to have that kind of capability. I wish there were more companies that can figure it out. We're trying, we're doing more and more ourselves, but a little startup, it's a lot different than a big company like Red Hat or IBM. So.
Yeah, I mean, IBM started, or Red Hat started with some years of advantage. So, and it was kind of funny, to see how it all played out. It started all with Linux and, kernel development, or even making distributions for the Linux kernel. And then now we have, Red Hat, but we have like the whole stack, right? So from the OS to the middleware up to the platform, which is today's Kubernetes, up to the upper layers, and pretty much everything is open source. So I'd say it's hard to copy Red Hat because of all this historical background and so on. But I enjoy working with open source. Being paid to work with open source 100% of my time.
Yeah, for sure. I'll ask you a little bit about that in a minute, but maybe a little bit on your background, how you got from your start to where you are today.
Oh yeah, so I'm, perhaps you can tell from my accent, but I'm Brazilian, and I'm in Europe for, since, 2008 now, and in Brazil, I started my software engineering career. I worked for some web agencies back then. I was a webmaster like 20 years ago, and I worked, for some banks, advertising agencies, and so on. And but then I decided to come to Europe, and I found this job at Red Hat in the Czech Republic, actually. So not here in Germany, where I am right now, doing quality assurance, which was really new to me. But quality assurance engineering is something that I became very passionate about. So doing automation and really having this idea of breaking things was really nice for me. And that's how I got into open source, really. I mean, I was a user of Linux before, but never really contributed to any code, or perhaps here and there a patch for a project that I was really, using a lot. But active open source contribution started, after I joined Red Hat. So I'm a software engineer by learning. It's not something that I did on college, but it's something that I enjoy doing. It's something that I enjoy learning every day. And then that's how I landed here. So now, for the past few years, I've been doing mostly Go development. So Jaeger and OpenTelemetry are mostly in Go. And before that, I was a Java developer in different projects here at Red Hat. So I joined Red Hat for the second time in 2013. So I guess it makes 8 years now. And to work on on JBoss portal. So perhaps, I don't know if the new folks here know about portlets or things like that. But
what is it, JSR 168, right? Is that
something like that? Yeah. I was actually closer to the WSRP part of things. So the remoting of portlets. So one portlet or one portlet server getting contents from another portlet server, and that bridge was WSRP. But then I started kind of by chance. I got into the monitoring space with Hockler, and so Hockler was perhaps to talk about Hockler, we have to talk about something else before, which was John. So JBoss Operations Network, and it was a monitoring solution for JBoss application servers. And Hockler was in this new generation of John, where we then, the team working on John, they decided to come up with a new architecture from scratch, because it was a dated solution back then already in 2017, 18 or something like that, 16 to 17. And then I joined them. We were part of the same bigger group. And when I joined them, I got into this monitoring world. And fast forward, so Hockler, then we got into the PM part of Hockler, and open tracing came up. People came up with the idea of open tracing, and we saw that the module that we had was not a very good fit for open tracing. When we decided to rewrite open tracing, Hockler APM on top of this new idea, we saw a blog post from Yudi saying, we have Jaeger and this is how it works. This is the architecture. And we thought, why don't we just collaborate then? I mean, he's having an architecture that is very similar to what we thought about doing, with split components, one doing the collection part, one doing the persistence and so on. And that's how the Java developers became then Go developers, right? So we started collaborating with Jaeger, and that's how I landed here, where I am right now.
So when you were working on the Java side, the portal and Hockler, you were already committing to open source at that point, right? I mean, that was you already made that transition. Got it.
Right. Yeah. Yes, everything at Red Hat is open source. 100% of what we do is open source. So the moment I joined Red Hat, was ready to work on open source projects. So Gate-in being the upstream for JBoss portal, and Hockler never actually became a product. I think individual components became part of OpenShift, but mostly as a implementation detail, right? So never went, as a user-facing solution.
Right. Was there good communities around those, or is the community that you're involved in now much more vibrant? I mean, is there a difference that you've seen as open source has kind of evolved from the Java world to the Go and the microservices world, right?
Right. So Gate-in certainly had a big community back then. But when I rejoined Red Hat in 2013, it wasn't that much vibrant anymore, because it was already so portlets were dated back then already. So people were moving to other things, and so Gate-in was fading out basically. And indeed, when I joined 6 months after, we decided to sunset Gate-in and JBoss portal, because not. Of course, the community plays a huge part of that, but customers were also moving out from portlets, and we saw that from miles away, and we decided let's focus on something that is going to be more useful in the future. We still supported portlets and Gate-in for some time, but mostly in a not developing new features. But so when I compared and Gate-in back then, when I rejoined Red Hat and Jaeger and OpenTelemetry right now, the current communities are huge, or OpenTelemetry is huge, basically. Jaeger is nice, it's decent, it's not so small, but OpenTelemetry is really big.
But the main difference, and this kind of getting to the next question about what you spend your time doing, but the OpenTelemetry community is like 95% vendors, right? Like companies that maybe don't spend so much of their time on open source, or maybe they just try to get things in that they need for their business or for their products. Whereas with Jaeger, it's, there isn't that kind of thing really. Obviously, we contribute to it at Logs.io because we want to use it inside our product, and we would rather make the open source better than just fork it and build proprietary features. I mean, that's just our opinion, similar to Red Hat, where you don't really build features that are proprietary to Red Hat, you build them in open source, and you're starting to create a lot of new services at Red Hat, right? If you can build a scalable SaaS service to do management, to do different things, then this is, one of the things that you can monetize as an open source business, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's indeed a difference between the communities. But I do see end users collaborating on OpenTelemetry as well. So I see more of that on Jaeger. So I see more users on Jaeger, but that might also be because Jaeger is older and more established than OpenTelemetry, and Jaeger is stable, right? So OpenTelemetry is not that stable yet. So a lot of folks are just waiting for OpenTelemetry to become GA, or the collector at least to become GA, so that they can start using it for real. But I do see some users.
It is GA technically, but we all know that there's an asterisk next to that, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, not the collector, right? So the collector is not GA yet. It's not V1. OpenTelemetry as a whole, like the tracing spec, is GA, and some SDKs are GA, like the Java, Python, .NET, I think, but not the collector. And I think the collector is a part of the whole that is somewhat important, I would argue. But I do see a few people in the community as end users, and they are contributing. So I'm really happy when I see those users, because that's a testament of the technology, right? So they are using that day to day, and people are using really cool features in there. So I've got in touch with someone doing scalable table-based sampling, which is something that not everybody is doing, and they're doing with OpenTelemetry Collector already for some time now. And they're end users, right? So they're not like vendors. So that's really good too.
We have at least 3 or 4 customers that I know of using tail-based sampling, but there's definitely some challenges around managing and scaling the collector, just because you can blow it up pretty easily with all the processing that it needs to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting. I think that's one of the key things that commercial APM and tracing tools have done for quite some time that open source has really missed. And so to me, that's like probably one of the most important things that we need at OpenTelemetry, is a good way to do tail-based sampling and potentially even distribute that technology a little bit instead of doing it all centrally. But so curious what you spend your time doing. Is it 100% community work, and what kind of work is that? Do you have other like secret Red Hat projects you work on, internal stuff, or docs? Or I'm just curious how you spend your time and divide it up between the different things that you do.
Yeah, it's mostly community. So it's mostly almost everything that I do end up as a PR somewhere in some upstream community, typically OpenTelemetry or Jaeger. But a normal day would involve a lot of replying to or answering or reading notifications, basically, and then engaging, replying to folks either internally or from the community. perhaps assisting some users because they opened an issue on Jaeger or OpenTelemetry, they don't know how to accomplish something. And so, at least a couple of hours every day is on notifications, basically, and most of that time is indeed the community side. So I'd say more than 50% of that work is community. And then, of course, as pretty much everyone, a couple of hours go to meetings as well, not every day. So my Fridays are free to only code. And that's, a wonderful idea that I got from someone that, just block the whole Friday and you have one work to do, like one huge chunk of highly, focused work. So if you need to debug a complicated issue and you need like blocks of 4 hours, then, it's very good when you have a day where you don't have anything else to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that idea. Yeah. I need to do that. I'm overwhelmed right now with obligations, and it's hard to, you end up working crazy late hours to get that chunk of productive time that you need, when you're working on something complicated.
Yeah, and then what I also do is I block, like whenever I can, I block the mornings, my mornings, which is, the afternoons in the US, so that I can also do some, at least 2, but hopefully 4 hours coding in the mornings here before going to the afternoons. And the afternoons are typically packed with meetings, either community or internal meetings.
Yeah. Makes sense.
But I'm a software engineer, and I like doing that. I like coding. I like doing that. And that's why I try as much as I can to stay, in the coding side. And then that is purely community. So we do have our goals at Red Hat, but even those are transparent, they're public. So if you go to our Jira, where we track all our work, you'll see our epics, you'll see how we break the tasks down, and you can link them to the community or to the upstream issues that we are working on. So right now, for instance, I'm right before our interview here, I was working on the performance comparison for tail-based sampling. So between the tail sampling processor versus the group by trace and the policy sampling, which doesn't exist yet, only on my machine, and comparing the performance of both. And those kind of things, they don't end up on, they all end up at upstream.
Right.
And,
sure.
and so that's mainly how I spend my time. So as much as I can coding, but of course also some bureaucratic or planning work.
So how do you manage your GitHub notifications? Because to me, it seems like we need some improvement there. It's very challenging. Between the email and the UI and GitHub, it's really hard to not miss things, basically. And I have a bunch of filters in my Gmail and various other things, but it's a big challenge for me. Someone has to fix it.
So there was when I was using a real mail client, not Gmail, I was able to filter on certain HTTP and certain envelope headers, and GitHub actually has one header. They add what is the type of the notification, so you can filter them. Like if someone explicitly mentioned me, then go to the inbox, or otherwise, then just go to some label and so on. But I don't manage at all. I mean, I'm a follower of the inbox zero philosophy. So I try not to have any notifications at all at any time on my inboxes. So the first thing that I do in the mornings, they are indeed to clean up my inboxes. So email and notifications. I don't read any GitHub notifications on my email anymore. I just don't. I should even actually turn it off if there's a way to. But then on GitHub itself, on the interface, it's per project. So if it is on OpenTelemetry, and OpenTelemetry is really noisy right now. The OpenTelemetry Collector is really noisy. I'm an approver, and it means that for every PR that is opened, I'm pinged to review it, and all the approvers are pinged. That's the way that it's set up there. So it's really noisy, and what I just do is, if it is this type of notification, I just mark as read. And if I'm explicitly been pinged, then I do go in there and, so it's easy to miss notifications that way. But it's the only way of keeping sanity. Now, for the other repositories like Jaeger, we don't have that, so they're I would say, easier to manage.
Or you're not getting pinged as an approver. I thought there was something that did that, no?
We had Mergify to sort of like load balancing of pull reviews and so on.
I see. Oh, and it takes you out of the automatically.
Yeah. So it's not the whole team. It's only a couple of people.
Yeah. Sounds more scalable, which is good.
Yeah.
So you did mention, we talked a little bit about GA and OpenTelemetry. How do you feel about the current state? I mean, it sounds like I feel like it's further along than maybe you do, but.
Well, for OpenTelemetry as a whole or for the individual components?
Well, I mean, I would say as a whole, we know there's still big gaps, but I mean, it's sort of, there's been discussions, obviously, over the last few months as the GA happened and the whole notion of production ready. I mean, how do you feel about it? Where do you, what's your take on the state of the union in OpenTelemetry?
So up until like yesterday, I had the feeling that the SDKs were really advanced. And some SDKs are GA ready, like the Java, the Python, and .NET. The specs are GA as well for the tracing part, so that's very good as well. But then just yesterday, someone mentioned that the Go library is not GA,
right,
and they actually have breaking chains still in the pipeline. So if you look at the milestones for the Go library, there are a couple of breaking chains in there. So I would expect at this point the SDKs will not introduce breaking chains anymore, or introduce changes. Well, anyway, it is like the last chance they have on making breaking chains. But I don't know. I would hope that by now it would be more stable on that front.
Yeah, I mean, this was sort of the downside and the complaints that we heard from lots of folks on open tracing. Yeah. Because once you implement this in your code and there's breaking changes in the SDK, it becomes a bunch of maintenance work. And we had this discussion recently on the Jaeger roadmap meeting a couple of weeks ago, or last week, sorry, it feels like a couple of weeks ago, where we said, should we do this work or should we wait? And I mean, just what you mentioned on the Go library itself seems like something that would cause us pain for Jaeger, right? Yeah,
and I mean, in that case, I heard from someone who was looking to instrument some project, right? So it's really our end users that they want to use, they need telemetry right now, they need to instrument their applications, but they don't feel that comfortable yet in doing that because they know breaking chains are coming. But I think we are in the last mile for that, so we are really getting very close to get the libraries and the APIs as SDK and as GA. And then the collector, I feel that we're really running with the collector, so a lot of PRs are open and closed on the same days. A lot of work is doing, a lot of breaking chains as well. And that to me is indicative that we are getting to a more stable destination soon.
This is one of the reasons I'm a big fan of auto instrumentation when you can do it, is because you can make instrumentation changes in the underlying library, agent, whatever you decide to call it, and the user doesn't really see the impact so much because you're not implementing it directly in the code. But you can't do this with Go and some other languages so easily.
Right. And I mean, I like auto instrumentation as well. I like the instrumentation libraries. Of course, we need them. But I also see a lot of potential in manual instrumentation. So people who want to track like business metrics, want to know how long a specific algorithm is taking. They don't have other choice. They have to instrument applications, themselves, like the business code. And I don't see anything wrong with that. Quite the opposite, So once a user incorporates this idea that I can instrument my code, I can get real telemetry or valuable or I don't know, a highly targeted telemetry data from my application, then I probably don't need those three other ones from the stack. So they can have, I would argue, better instrumentation. But of course, instrumentation libraries, they are needed, they're required, especially for folks who've not instrumented applications before, so that they can start getting something very quick. And so, and I think that's very powerful.
Yeah.
When you instrument something and then you just get telemetry data out of that application, you see the user's faces, whoa, my application is doing that. I didn't know that,
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love to see when users are starting to use it to solve business problems and not just technical problems. It definitely happens more and more, but that's the key to really making observability different than technical troubleshooting, which is a completely different goal use case for the same type of data. So what do you think is a hot button topic while we're talking about OpenTelemetry? I mean, sounds like you're spending a lot of time, and I know you're refactoring a lot of the tail-based sampling and doing a lot of that work. So is that for you the hot item right now, or are there other areas where you want to spend your time or you're very interested in improving?
Yeah, there are a couple of topics that I'm working a lot these days. And I think the biggest one is authentication on the OpenTelemetry Collector community. So the PR on the refactoring of the current authentication, the PR for that just got merged yesterday. So I think that's a big milestone. And there are two other next steps for that. So the first one, is to propagate authentication data as part of this data point, and then finally the last one.
Can you clarify that a little bit?
Sure.
So authentication between the instrumentation and the collector, or is it something else?
Yeah, it is. So the idea is that a client would be an untrusted party to the collector. Right, so I can then expose my collector to the internet for some reason, and then only have some clients send data to this collector, and the collector would then verify that request, that gRPC or HTTP request, contains authentication data, and any receiver within the collector can then use an authentication extension to then do the authentication itself, and with that. Yeah, and then the authenticators, they know how to verify that information, that request, that RPC. But sometimes you also need access to authentication data down the pipeline to make tenancy decisions, for instance, or things or even to just bypass this authentication data to the next collector. So we need now a way to propagate this authentication data down the pipeline. And we decided to do that by adding the authentication data into the resource, meaning into the data point itself. So that then components like the batcher and so on, they can take that into consideration while batching stuff. So I can then batch by authentication or batch by some characteristics of the authentication data, like by subject or by tenant. Yeah, so those are the next steps, add the authentication data to the data point, and then just pass this authentication data then to next collector, so as a client.
Right, that's pretty cool. Yeah, it's definitely useful for services and stuff too.
Absolutely, yeah. And the other topic that I'm really thinking a lot about these days is the storage problem or the storage story for Jaeger. So we historically had a few selected storage mechanisms for Jaeger, and it all started with Cassandra and in-memory. And over time, we added an Elasticsearch and Badger and Kafka.
Yeah.
Neither of those are really like trace storage. They're good. They work. But we could do better, and we, especially for smaller workloads or for smaller setups, we need something lightweighter, than what we currently have. Badger would work for that case, but it's very hard to then merge those files, those Badger databases, when you move one step up in the layer in the architecture. So that's one thing that we are kind of playing with at Red Hat. So not only me, but some colleagues here as well, is what kind of storage would make sense for Jaeger for the future. So is it still Elasticsearch or OpenSearch, or can it be something else? Right. So if it is something else, then what should it be? Should it be a time series database? Because it kind of makes sense, but it doesn't at the same time. Should it be a graph database? The same. I mean, it kind of makes sense, but at the same time, not so much. Or should it be a traditional column oriented data store? Because storing the data is the easy part. Extracting the data is really the hard part. And for that kind of queries that we need from tracing storages, columnar seems a good solution. But so those are the things that we have to think about, and
for sure,
that I'm passionate about right now.
It's an interesting topic, and one that the industry's always been grappling with around data stores, because when you think about it more broadly, between the three current, not future, signal types that we think about with observability, metrics, logs, and traces, ideally you want as few data stores as possible, because then you can do interesting analytics and correlation. But at the same time, you're not really going to find a data store to do all three. So you end up having this fragmentation. But a good example, you mentioned the graph database, and the way that we render the topology graphs in Jaeger is far from ideal. And obviously having a graph database would be really nice, but at the same time, it introduces complexity for people that just want to get up and running. So it's definitely challenging. But I'm pretty interested in something I'm going to bring to the community really soon in Jaeger is looking at OpenSearch and some of the plugins. I think we can enhance what Jaeger can do as well, particularly in the areas of anomaly detection and alerting and things that have already been built into OpenSearch as plugins are good ways for us to potentially extend Jaeger without having to do a huge amount of engineering, but it raises other challenges too. So, yep.
One thing that I find very interesting is that it seems like we are so advanced right now, and we are in some aspects, right? So we can do amazing things with distributed tracing right now, and with other signals as well, of course. But I can't stop and wonder, we are still seeing this technology at its infancy. We're at the very beginning, even though the technology itself, or Dapper is now 20 years old, or it's from 2008, so 13 years old now. So it is like decades old technology now, but we're still we're very good at the collection side of things, so instrumentation and the backend that receives all of this data. But what do we do with this data is still the big problem. And we have a lot of vendors out there that are focusing on certain types of this data, on working on this data in certain ways. So some of them more in the machine learning side, some of them in MTTR, some of them not so much in the ops side. So it's interesting to see what they are doing, but I still have the feeling that there's so much for us to learn, and And yeah, so it's very interesting. It's a nice area to work on right now because there's so much to do.
Yeah.
Especially on this third leg, the
Yeah. And I think
visualization part.
like open source, the downside of it is that as engineers and not product people, the community doesn't really think about usability and ease of use as much as it needs to.
Yeah.
Which I think is just people want to build the tool and then you figure out how to make the tool work. But users that come in to the Jaeger channel on Slack, for example, that have really basic questions, that we just don't make that any easier for them, really. I know all-in-one is a great way to make it easier to get started, but it's still, we could OpenTelemetry, we could build a lot more automated, configuration, detection, installation that would just make it easier for users. And I know like folks at Lightstep are doing some work around that, but it definitely needs a lot of work. We have to do a lot of education when we try to get folks on OpenTelemetry right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the first step, and we're gonna get there eventually. By writing blog posts, by writing documentation, and so on. But I really sometimes I like to think about what can we do in the future, what else can we do with tracing data, and some of the features I can see them or implemented in a few years from now. But wouldn't it be cool to have like an extension for Visual Studio Code or for whatever IDE that you use, where you can just, while you are coding, you can see the latency for that line here, the P90, the P50, and P99, I don't know, for that line based on tracing data, on telemetry data that you received somewhere. Not necessarily tracing data, right? I mean, it can be a signal. We don't have, right now, it's very hard for any telemetry signal to tell you what is the memory consumption for that line of code, right?
Yeah.
So of course, depending on the tooling that you're using, so Go, you can have a very good idea if you write benchmarks for that line of code, but you cannot have an automated tool that tells you, n allocations were made here, and you are probably having a memory leak in there, and so on and so forth, right?
We many years ago, we actually did a hackathon project that did that at App Dynamics because we collected method level details. Like in Java, we did it in Java, the POC, but it would actually surface the data inside the IDE coming from the production system about certain methods and performance. But that's part of the challenge is that, and something that I've, been talking to other folks about, like profiling data and profiling of methods, which is something you do, more when you're doing performance engineering. It entered the world of APM, but it hasn't entered the world of distributed tracing, really.
Yeah,
So,
that's true. Yeah.
Profiling, I think, is yet another thing. And I was talking to Bartik about this on the episode last month, because he's been spending a lot of time on profiling. And, is profiling another signal? How do we incorporate this into observability? But getting back to your idea of helping developers at coding time, I think you kind of have to profile to do that, right?
Right. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be. It would help, of course, if it is profiling data. But imagine that I'm a Java developer, that I have my Quarkus application here that is based on JAX-RS. Yeah. And we do have, using instrumentation libraries that we just talked about, we have tracing information or spans created for that endpoint. So we know how long that specific endpoint is taking. We can get runtime information from production systems based on trace information for that endpoint. And then we can display that, I think that requiring developers to go to the Jaeger UI or to whatever UI is an unnecessary step. It's blocking, the developers in getting knowledge. And if you can get tracing data closer to where developers are, then that's a huge win in my book. And the same way that we have like Git extensions for VS Code. I think it's called Git Lens, where it shows you, the history of that line. We could have something like that for Jaeger, for tracing data as well. So not only the data that I have right now or the information that I have right now, telemetry data from right now, but I can also compare with how that line of code fared last month. So and then perhaps even play with the Git history here as well, saying that Git commit here introduced a memory leak, or that one here is responsible for a 20% increase of performance. So those are futuristic things that I think about quite often, and but we have so much to do until we get to that point.
Well, and then there's also, we do some of this in our internal CD system that we built ourselves. Is we actually look at performance data during our unit tests as we're pushing things into production, just to make sure that we're not introducing regression. So, this type of thing I think is being more common. I know the new CNCF project, Captain, I don't know how to pronounce it, allows you to basically insert observability data into pipelines and do things like that in a more easy way than what we do. So it's another way to catch these issues before they get into production. But yeah, clearly,
absolutely,
like that coding time would be the most efficient. That makes complete sense to me. So.
Yeah, but I think CI also works. If you're telling the developer, if you're being part of the workflow for the developer, then it's already a huge win. If we just keep this data isolated somewhere, and if this data is only meant to be seen by SREs and operations during a downtime, during an outage, then that's bad. So I'm really excited whenever I see a non-MTTR use case for tracing data, because I think those are just beautiful.
For sure. Cool. So I did want to talk about another project and some of the cool things that you're doing around diversity and the intern programs. I find it interesting. I actually don't know a lot about it, but I'd love to get involved, just to get more people involved in the community, to have different people working together, because that makes the best kind of software for everyone. So can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you've been doing and how you've been trying to change open source software engineering?
Of course, yeah. So this is a topic that is very important to me. I think that some years ago, I read that some people were not well treated on the internet, and that was like a shock for me, like Brazilian white male, not coming from a poor family, not rich either, but middle class, and I thought, I'm really in a very good position here, and how come I didn't know about those problems? How come I was blinded, I was blind by, anyway. So a few years ago, I was at a conference and there was a talk about Outreachy, and that opened my eyes. I thought, as someone working in open source, I can do more than just code. I can help other folks as well. And
so
one thing
that Outreachy, just for people that aren't familiar, because I didn't know much about it till a couple of months ago myself. So maybe you can tell
sure.
us.
Sure. So Outreachy is an internship program focused on open source technology. So you apply for the internship and you have to work on open source projects, and people are selected based on the socioeconomic or their backgrounds. So if they believe they're part of an underrepresented part of society, or of the IT industry in general, then they have a good chance of getting approved or selected to apply for an internship. So it doesn't necessarily have to be women or people of color or anything like that. It really is, because diversity sometimes is different from country to country, from state to state. So it really, when you apply for the project, you tell them why you think you should be part of Outreachy. And I've been helping with that since 2017, I think, when Jaeger joined the CNCF, basically. And we are very grateful to the CNCF for always approving our funds for the interns. Whenever I can, I am a mentor, and I'm also a community coordinator for the CNCF tracing. So CNCF tracing is like the umbrella, including Jaeger and OpenTracing back then, and now Jaeger and OpenTelemetry. So if you're part of both communities or any community, Jaeger or OpenTelemetry, if you're someone who wants to work on some features but you don't have the time, or and you want to be a mentor, then you can just let us know, and we can help you with being a mentor for the next cohort. And so far we've had great interns out of this project, and I'm really happy that pretty much all of them are still working in the IT industry. They were able to get back to the industry or start in our industry, which is an area that pays very good salaries. We have very good working conditions most of the time. It's not comparable to other areas, and I think it's a shame that we have so low diversity in technology. So I try to do my part, and that's it's something that I'm really passionate about.
So the outreachy program with the people that sponsor interns, and that's companies and nonprofits. They're a nonprofit themselves, and they pay the interns for, what is it, a 4 or 6 month sort of
it's
as an intern.
Right. They have two programs per year, and it is 3 to 4 months every internship. In the end, it's a little bit more than that, because candidates have to contribute to the open source projects before the application, before the actual internship. So a month or something like that before, they already have to contribute. So it really is like 4-5 months of work, right? And it is paid for by sponsors. Yeah. So in our case, the CNCF typically sponsors our interns, and the interns get almost 100% of this money. So some of this money is also for administrative costs by the outreach organization itself, which is part of this Software Freedom Conservancy. And I think the biggest investment here is really on time from people in the communities. So when I'm a mentor, of course, Red Hat pays my like those couple of hours that I work every day on mentoring. But the community, the open source communities, they're so awesome that the interns, they come to the Slack channels and people just help them. It doesn't have necessarily to be the mentor. And I think that's the beauty of open source in general, but about these kind of programs focused on open source code.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. So anything else that we didn't cover that you want to talk about as our last ending before I go and kind of talk about a couple of news items?
Yeah, sure. So I would like to encourage all of you to check out the projects that we work on. So OpenTelemetry and Jaeger, join us. Use them, send your bug reports, help us as well. It would be very nice to have you as part of our projects. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. It was really good to be with you here today, Jonah, and have this discussion.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thanks for joining. And you can stick around for the news. I'm going to cover a couple items. Sure. And always good to get your perspective. The first one, which both of us are working on, along with others for the Jaeger project, is next week is KubeCon. So it's a big industry event. It's important, especially for the open source community. It's been, when we used to do this in person, it was pretty amazing to watch the growth of the conference as Kubernetes went from this little irrelevant project to having, 30,000 people, I think, at the last one we did in person. The virtual ones are not as good. We would love to get together and have a beer and shake hands with people and exchange ideas, but maybe next year we'll get to do that. Yeah, so both of us will be spending some time at the Jaeger booth. Juraci, are you working on the OpenTelemetry booth too?
No, just the Jaeger one.
Okay. And we also have talks from Joe Elliott, who's one of the maintainers, who works at Grafana Labs. He's speaking. And Albert Toe, who works at Logs.io and also is a Jaeger maintainer, is also doing a lightning talk. And did you have other highlights that you wanted to mention for KubeCon, Juraci?
I do have my selection of talks to watch. There's some observability related ones that I really need to catch up, and topics that are somewhat out of my bubble, and I do want to catch up on, like eBPF talk on connected to observability. I'm really looking forward to that one. But also, there is one on getting traces out of Kubernetes events. That also seems very interesting. So yeah, do take a look at the agenda and make your schedule.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of eBPF too. We just have to figure out how to deploy it more easily, but that's another topic for another time. Cool. So the other update is since we had our last episode, OpenSearch is out. This is, and Juraci mentioned it too, but this is the Apache 2 version of Elasticsearch. AWS did a lot of the initial work. Community is still forming around it. There's definitely been some good progress happening, people testing it. We're hoping to have the first build, which will be a beta build, coming quite soon. And people continue to test. We're doing a lot of work with it internally to figure out how to move to it at some point for our services. But we're excited about the project. We've been contributing a whole bunch of features, fixes, various other things. So it's going quite well. So definitely check it out, opensearch.org. And the GitHub repos are pretty active for OpenSearch too. The other thing, yesterday, AWS, they have a distribution of OpenTelemetry. So the nice thing about OpenTelemetry is it's very easy to pick pieces of it and have your own build. So AWS does this. They have a distribution for OpenTelemetry, and they yesterday announced a Lambda layer. And so what this is, if you're running a Lambda function in various languages, it makes it easy to deploy a collector, which at runtime does the Lambda instrumentation, sends it to a collector, which can then be exported to another collector, to a service. They support a bunch of different services in that distribution. Of course, the Amazon services, Logs.io, a bunch of other services are included in there. But you can also just send it to another collector and then send it to other locations, or do sampling, as we mentioned earlier. So there's lots of uses for that to help people get better trace data from their Lambdas. So check that out. It's called the AWS distro for OpenTelemetry. You should be able to find it. Any comments on any of those, Juraci? Sorry.
No, I think you covered pretty well.
Cool. And then the last one that I wanted to mention, because it's probably the biggest gap in OpenTelemetry today, is logging. So we're definitely making a little bit of progress there. I know that our team is working on some POC SDKs, basically ways to use Log4j or Logback and implement OpenTelemetry standard logging and send it to a collector using OLTP. So we're starting to see slow progress in logging. The spec is in pretty good shape. We just need to get some more code out there so that people can start implementing it, finding the challenges and issues, and moving it forward. So if anyone is interested in contributing to logging, There's meetings happening every other week. There's repos out there with code and POC samples. And I hope that we can shore that up, because then OpenTelemetry starts getting closer to the promise of being the hub for all of the observability data. So cool. Anything else that you want to add on the logging side? I know you're probably not spending a lot of time there, but
I'm excited about the news that you just shared. I mean, that sounds very good. I wasn't aware of it.
Baby steps, but we got to move this thing forward, so that my goal is next year we have a fully functional set of technologies, but yeah, we're working on it. So I think that's it for the news, and just wanted to thank Juraci for joining us and for all of you listening in. And with that, have a nice weekend, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.